They laughed at the poor black boy's torn clothes until he sat at the piano. The hall shimmered with polish and grandeur, every surface designed to impress. Chandeliers dripped with crystal light, the wooden floor gleamed, and rows of velvet-covered chairs lined the space with military neatness. Children in pressed shirts and polished shoes stood near the front with their parents, whispering nervously, their programs clutched tightly in their hands. Their laughter rose in little bursts, too loud, betraying the nerves they tried to hide beneath practiced smiles. Into this glittering world stepped a boy who did not belong. His skin was dark and smooth, his eyes wide with quiet hesitation as he took in the vastness of the room. His jacket was thin, frayed at the edges, one sleeve hanging slightly looser than the other where stitches had long since given way. His shirt was clean but faded, its collar bent out of shape. His pants bore a tear at the knee, carefully patched but still visible, and his shoes were scuffed and worn, the leather cracked with every step. The sound of his entrance was small, but heads turned nonetheless. A hush fell in pockets around the room, parents raising their eyebrows, children covering their mouths with quick giggles. One boy in a bright new suit elbowed his friend, pointing at the scuffed shoes with a smirk. A mother leaned down to her daughter, whispering words that carried farther than she intended, about how some people should not be here at all. The boy felt the heat of their stares burning into him, but he kept his gaze low, his hands gripping the program they had given him at the door. He read the letters on the page, though, the words blurred from the pressure of holding back tears. His throat tightened, but he took another step, then another, walking down the aisle toward the row of children who would soon perform. The laughter of the others did not escape him. He heard the muttered judgments, the careless cruelty. His jacket felt heavier, his shoes louder, every flaw in his clothing magnified beneath the brilliance of the chandeliers. Yet he did not turn back. Something steadier than shame kept him moving. His eyes flicked briefly toward the grand piano on the stage, its polished black surface gleaming in the light, the keys waiting like teeth of ivory. His heart skipped, his chest filling with a quiet determination. The parents looked away as he passed, choosing to focus on their own children's polished outfits, their tidy hair, their rehearsed songs. The teachers offered him polite but clipped nods, their smiles faltering as they noted the state of his clothes. No one reached out to reassure him. No one told the others to stop laughing. The boy lowered himself into a seat at the end of the row, tucking his torn knee behind the chair leg, folding his scuffed shoes neatly under him. He clasped his hands in his lap, resting them on the program as though it were a shield. Around him the noise of chatter rose again, but inside him silence gathered, calm and solid. He sat quietly, waiting, invisible to most, yet carrying a secret that none of them could see. The hum of chatter filled the hall as the children waited their turn, their polished shoes tapping softly against the wooden floor. At the end of the row sat the boy in his torn clothes, his posture small but steady. He clasped his hands in his lap, eyes lowered, trying to make himself invisible. But the others noticed him, and their whispers grew louder. A boy in a crisp navy blazer leaned toward his friend, pointing at the frayed sleeve of the boy's jacket. His laugh was sharp, slicing through the air. Did he dig that out of a trash can? He muttered, the words carrying just far enough for the boy to hear. Another student in a spotless white shirt snickered, his voice dripping with cruelty. Look at his shoes. My father wouldn't even wash the car in those. Their laughter fed off one another, growing bolder with every glance they cast toward him. Parents joined in with quieter judgment. A woman in pearls shook her head, her lips curving into a tight smile. She whispered to her neighbor, "Why do they even let children like that perform here? It makes the whole event look shabby." A man in a tailored suit nodded, his eyes narrowing as he studied the boy. "He doesn't belong in this hall," he said flatly, his tone full of finality, as though the boy's fate had already been decided. The boy kept his gaze fixed on the program folded neatly in his lap. Every word pierced him, each one louder than the applause that filled the hall for the performers who came before him. His cheeks burned, his throat ached with the effort of swallowing down the humiliation. Yet he did not look up, did not defend himself. His silence was not weakness but armor, his lowered eyes a shield that hid the fire beginning to stir inside him. The mocking did not stop. A girl with her hair tied in a perfect bow leaned forward from the row ahead, whispering to her friend with a smirk. "Maybe he's here to clean the piano after we're finished." They laughed softly, hiding their faces behind their programs. The boy's hands tightened on his own sheet, the edges creasing under the pressure. Around him, the air thickened with judgment. The glow of chandeliers seemed harsher, the polished wood beneath his shoes colder. He felt the weight of every stare, every dismissive shake of the head, every cruel smile. He was a stranger in their world of silk and polish, and they made sure he knew it. But deep inside, beneath the hurt and shame, something steady grew. He heard their words, but did not let them move him from his seat. He did not cry, he did not lash out. He breathed slowly, each breath a reminder that he had not come here for their approval. He had come for something larger, something that would soon silence every laugh and every sneer. For now, he bowed his head and endured, knowing that his answer would not come in words but in music. The announcer's voice carried easily across the hall, each name echoing as it was called from the printed program. Parents leaned forward with pride when their children's names were spoken, applause breaking out in polite waves as each performer approached the stage. The children straightened their backs, smoothing their already neat clothes, glowing in the light of their family's admiration. Toward the end of the list, when the boy's name was read aloud, the reaction was different. A pause rippled through the audience, like the room itself did not recognize the sound. Whispers followed almost immediately, soft at first, then louder as people turned toward one another with doubtful expressions. "Who is that?" a woman murmured, her pearl necklace glinting as she leaned closer to her husband. He shook his head slowly, his eyes flicking toward the end of the row where the boy sat hunched in his worn jacket. "He's on the list? Must be some mistake." A group of parents sitting in the middle rows craned their necks, searching until they spotted him, their lips curled with faint disdain, their voices low but sharp enough to sting. They let him perform? He looks like he should be in the audience, not on the stage. Another added, "He's not prepared. This will be embarrassing." Their laughter was stifled but present, a cruel undertone beneath the respectful hush of the hall. Even the teachers at the side of the stage exchanged uneasy glances. One adjusted her glasses and whispered to a colleague, "I didn't know he was signed up." The other shrugged, lips tight, his eyes narrowing, as if to measure the boy from across the room. What could he possibly do? He doesn't even have proper attire. Their doubt hung thick in the air, visible in the way their brows furrowed and their mouths pressed into thin lines. The boy heard every murmur. His name, instead of being lifted by applause, had been pulled down into disbelief. He kept his eyes on the folded program in his lap, tracing the letters with his finger, grounding himself against the tide of skepticism washing over him. His ears burned with the sound of their doubt, but he did not move, did not protest. Children sitting nearby shifted away from him slightly, as though his presence threatened to tarnish their polished image. One boy in a stiff suit smirked, whispering to his friend, "Maybe he'll trip walking up there." The two giggled, hiding their mouths behind their programs. The chandeliers glowed brighter as though mocking the shadows cast over his name. The boy inhaled slowly, steadying the rhythm of his breath. He had not come here for their approval. He had come because something inside him knew he belonged, even if no one else believed it. The stage waited, the piano gleamed, and though the world doubted, he carried within him a certainty they could not see. He remained quiet, absorbing their disbelief, knowing that soon the same mouths that whispered against him would fall into silence. His name was called again, this time by the announcer with a little pause, as if even they were unsure it belonged on the list. The room stirred, and all at once every head turned toward the end of the row, where Saturday, his body felt heavy as he rose, the thin fabric of his jacket pulling awkwardly across his shoulders. The sound of his shoes against the floor was soft but seemed to echo through the grand hall like the uneven beat of a drum. Whispers followed him, weaving through the rows of velvet chairs like smoke. "Look at his clothes," someone muttered, the words sharp as glass. Another voice, laced with quiet laughter, said, "He is going to embarrass himself." The children who had snickered earlier leaned forward now, smirks widening as they nudged each other, eager to watch him fail. He kept his eyes down, but the heat of their stares pressed against him. Each step up the short staircase to the stage felt like climbing a mountain, his knees weak with the weight of their judgment. The bright lights above him flickered across his torn trousers and scuffed shoes, exposing every flaw, every mark of poverty. His heart pounded so loudly that it drowned the sound of polite applause given out of obligation, not respect. The piano loomed before him, vast and gleaming under the light. Its polished black surface reflected his small frame, his worn clothes, his uncertain face. He lowered himself onto the bench, his legs barely long enough to anchor firmly against the floor. His hands hovered above the keys, trembling so visibly that the front rows leaned in closer, hungry for a mistake. A hush fell over the hall, not out of anticipation for beauty, but out of the collective eagerness to witness his humiliation. Teachers exchanged looks from the side of the stage, their expressions a mix of pity and doubt. Parents settled back in their chairs, some shaking their heads already, convinced this would be over quickly. The children who had mocked him whispered softly, their laughter still caught in their throats. He stared at the keys, rows of black and white waiting silently, each one holding the possibility of either redemption or ruin. For a moment his breath caught, his fingers twitching as the memory of every cruel word flooded his mind. Torn clothes, scuffed shoes, a boy who did not belong. The weight of their scorn sat heavy in his chest. But beneath the trembling there was something else. A rhythm, faint but steady, that lived inside him no matter how loud the laughter. He drew in a breath, long and deep, filling himself with the silence of the hall. His fingers lowered to the keys, uncertain at first, grazing the ivory as though testing the air. The audience leaned forward, still expecting failure, their disbelief thick as smoke in the air. He pressed the first note, the sound soft but pure, and the hall waited. The boy's small hands trembled, but he did not pull away. Instead, he straightened his back, fixed his eyes on the piano, and prepared to let the music speak where words never could. The first note lingered in the air like a fragile thread of glass. It was soft, almost hesitant, yet it carried with it a clarity that reached every corner of the hall. For a moment, the audience leaned forward, ready to hear the mistake they had all predicted. But instead of faltering, the boy's fingers moved again, pressing another key, then another, until the sound blossomed into a melody that shimmered with grace. The room fell utterly silent. The laughter, the whispers, the cruel muttering evaporated, swallowed by the music that now poured from the piano. His small hands, moments earlier trembling, found their rhythm as if they had been waiting for this all along. His back straightened, his eyes focused on the keys, and with every note his fear melted away. What replaced it was something deeper, something that seemed too vast for his thin frame to contain. The melody swelled, filling the hall with warmth and sorrow, joy and longing. His playing was not just technical, though every note was precise. It was alive with emotion, each phrase carrying a story that words could not express. The audience sat frozen, stunned by the beauty that came from the boy in torn clothes. Parents who had shaken their heads moments earlier now leaned forward, their lips parted in awe. The children who had snickered no longer dared to whisper. Every rise and fall of the music carried the weight of his silence, the dignity he had held while enduring their scorn. The piano became his voice, powerful and undeniable. His fingers danced across the black and white keys with fluid certainty, shaping the melody into something both tender and fierce. It was the sound of resilience, the sound of someone who had been overlooked, underestimated, and mocked, yet carried within him a brilliance no one could deny. Teachers at the side of the stage exchanged wide-eyed looks, their skepticism dissolving into admiration. Some parents blinked back tears, their earlier judgment now feeling small and shameful in the presence of such beauty. The music rose higher, soaring like a bird that had long been caged, and the boy's worn jacket, his scuffed shoes, his patched trousers, all of it vanished in their minds, replaced by the image of a musician who commanded the room. As the final notes of the piece lingered, fading gently into silence, the hall remained breathless. The boy's hands rested lightly on the keys, his chest rising and falling with controlled breath. He did not look at the audience, did not search for their approval. He sat still, his dignity intact, the echo of his music louder than any applause could be. The same people who had mocked him only minutes before now found themselves unable to speak. Their laughter had been silenced, replaced by awe, their arrogance humbled by a boy who had needed only a piano to change everything. The melody poured from the piano like a river unbound, rising and falling with a force that no one in the hall could resist. At first, the audience sat frozen, stunned by the sheer beauty of it, but as the minutes stretched, the weight of the music began to break through their walls. A woman in the second row pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes wet with sudden tears. A man who had crossed his arms at the beginning of the boy's performance leaned forward, his shoulders softening, his head bowing as though in reverence. The sound was no longer just music, it was confession, it was triumph. It was a voice long silenced, suddenly filling the air with power. The children who had mocked him earlier could not look away. Their smirks were gone, replaced by open mouths and wide eyes. They had expected wrong notes, clumsy hands, and embarrassment to sneer at. Instead, they were met with a performance so full of life and precision that they felt their own cheeks burn with shame. The boy's torn clothes seemed to vanish, eclipsed by the brilliance of his music. The only thing visible now was the strength in his small frame and the dignity in the way he carried himself. The teachers exchanged glances at the side of the stage, their disbelief melting into awe. One whispered to the other, voice shaking, "We had no idea." Their eyes followed his every movement, each keystroke revealing not a mistake, but mastery. They had doubted him, dismissed him as someone who would stumble, yet here he was weaving a melody that could rival the finest students they had ever taught. As the music swelled, the audience began to stir. First a quiet murmur of appreciation, then applause that broke through the silence even before the piece was finished. Some guests rose to their feet, unable to remain seated as the boy's music carried them higher than they thought possible. Cheers followed, tears glistened in the light, and the once proud parents who had shaken their heads at him now lowered their gazes in shame. The boy played on, unshaken by the sudden change in atmosphere. His fingers never faltered, his expression calm and steady, as though he had known all along that this was the moment when silence would turn into respect. Every note reminded them of their mistake, every chord struck against their arrogance. By the time the final notes began to fade, nearly the entire hall was standing. The sound of applause and cheers thundered like a storm, echoing through the grand hall that only minutes earlier had been filled with judgment and laughter. The boy lifted his hands gently from the keys, his chest rising with a deep breath. He bowed his head slightly, not for their approval, but as a gesture of completion. The audience erupted in celebration, their eyes shining with something far different than what they had carried before. The poor boy in torn clothes had transformed the room, and the awe they felt now was something they would never forget. The final note lingered in the hall like a breath held too long, and then it dissolved into silence so complete that it felt as if the world itself had paused. For a heartbeat, no one moved, every eye fixed on the boy sitting at the gleaming piano in his patched trousers and worn jacket. His chest rose and fell, his small hands rested lightly on the keys, and his head bowed slightly as though he were letting the music go. Then, all at once, the hall erupted. Applause thundered, filling every corner, breaking against the walls like waves. People rose from their seats, some with tears in their eyes, others clapping so hard their palms stung. The same children who had laughed at his torn clothes now stared in silence, their faces pale with shock, their mouths open but empty of words. The parents who had shaken their heads lowered them now, shame burning against their earlier arrogance. The teachers stood straighter at the side of the stage, their eyes wide, unable to mask the pride they suddenly felt for the boy they had doubted. The boy rose slowly from the bench, his shoes still scuffed, his jacket still frayed, but now every eye followed him not with ridicule but with awe. He bowed his head humbly, his movements small and quiet, refusing to bask in triumph, though triumph was his. The applause grew louder, echoing through the hall as if the building itself celebrated him. In the back rows, whispers began to spread. They called it remarkable, unbelievable, unforgettable. Some spoke in low voices about how his playing had moved them to tears. Others admitted they had been wrong to judge him by his appearance. The story began to take shape even before he left the stage, carried on the breath of those who had witnessed it. That night, long after the hall emptied, people still spoke of the boy with the torn clothes. They told the story with wonder, passing it from one to another, reshaping it into legend. They said he silenced cruelty not with anger but with music. They said he proved that talent is not dressed in silk, that dignity cannot be stitched into fine fabric, and that true worth will always reveal itself, no matter how deeply buried beneath judgment it lies. The boy himself walked quietly from the stage, his steps steady, his head lowered. He did not smile. He did not seek the eyes of those who now adored him. He had done what he came to do. The whispers and applause belonged to them, but the music had belonged to him. He knew that for the rest of their lives, those who had mocked him would remember the night when a poor boy in torn clothes made them bow their heads. And he knew that they would never again look at him, or anyone like him, in the same way.